Well, good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for our Housing 301 workshop regarding housing element outreach. We've got a wonderful program today featuring Diane Friedman, who works on legislation for the town of Danville and is the deputy town manager, and David Crompton, who is director of planning. Both of these professionals are amazing public servants. You all should be very, very honored and pleased to get to know them. I see Kat Bravo on the line and Riley Anderson. So let me turn it over now to Diane Friedman, who's going to kick off our program.
All right, thank you, Judy, for the introduction, and thank you to the Chamber for being engaged with us along the way in this process of public engagement around our housing element update. We welcome our businesses and thank you to everyone for joining us on this 301 workshop. This is the third workshop in a series of housing element workshops that we have presented as part of our 16-month public outreach process that began last month. This webinar is dedicated to how to use the housing simulation tool, and as Judy mentioned, to meet the goals and objectives of the Danville Housing Elements Update, the Community Outreach and Engagement Plan, the project team has partnered with a diverse set of stakeholders within the community who represent multiple interests and experiences related to housing. The Community Engagement Plan has and will continue to focus on outreach to all residents, community-based nonprofits, service providers, businesses, organizations, and agencies who will be affected by the strategies and policies implemented in the Housing Element Update. Again, this has been a 16-month process, and we are happy to have you along the way. A summary of our outreach efforts can be found in the Housing Element draft under Appendix F. Next slide, please. I would like to present an overview of the agenda today. Dave Crompton, as mentioned, our Chief of Planning, is going to give you a Reader's Digest overview of housing. And then Riley Anderson Barrett, who is our Associate Planner, is going to talk about community outreach and the simulation tool. And then our next engagement activities, how they inform decision-making, what they are, and how to use them. And then we will be here as long as is necessary to answer any of your questions. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to Dave Crompton. Next slide.
Thank you, Diane, and good morning, everybody. I'm happy to be here. As Diane mentioned, I'm just going to give a brief review of what a housing element is and why we are required to do it and where we are in the process. So the reason that we are doing a housing element is that it's required under state law. It goes all the way back to 1969. The state requires every community, every city, every county in the state to have a housing element that is part of their general plan. And they are approved every 8 years. So they go in 8-year cycles. We're currently in preparing for the 6th cycle, which is our 2023 to 2031 housing element. So what's in a housing element? Number one, it has a housing plan. So it talks about, it sets goals and policies and implementation and timelines for how we're going to accomplish the different requirements under state law that are part of our housing element. It has an analysis of housing needs. So it looks at the housing that we currently have in the community, and it looks at the types of housing that we're going to need to provide to house our community and for the region over the next 8-year cycle. It talks about the different types of constraints that we face when we're talking about trying to get more housing in Danville, both non-governmental constraints, which would be, Danville, the price of land and the price of construction is a real constraint. Then it talks about governmental constraints, which may slow down housing, such as permitting fees, time requirements for processing and environmental review, and looks to find ways to streamline that. And then most importantly, it's identification of sites. The state allocates a number of sites, a number of housing units to the town, and we have to find places for them. So next slide, please. So the state of California goes through a process where they do population projections and then related housing projections for the population. And it gives those numbers to the local regional governments, which in our case is ABAG. ABAG oversees all the cities and the counties in the 9 Bay Area county area. And for this cycle, they gave a large number of housing units to ABAG, and then it was ABAG's requirement to go through a process. They had a committee that was formed called the Methodology Committee, and they came up with methodology for how the regional units are going to be assigned to the different jurisdictions in the Bay Area. And for Danville, at the conclusion of that process, they assigned Danville a total of 2,241 units to accommodate over the next 8-year cycle. And those are in a variety of affordability levels, from very low, moderate, and above moderate housing. I think we're about split between low and very low affordable housing and the moderate, above moderate housing needs. Next slide, please. So this is just kind of a comparison. These are all the 19 cities in Contra Costa County, as well as unincorporated Contra Costa area. You can see for the town of Danville, the 2,241 total, and how it's broken down into the very low, moderate income categories. You can see the very low is less than 50% of the median area income, on up to above moderate income units. You can also see where, the other cities in Contra Costa, what they were assigned. Looks like the highest was the city of, it's Concord. San Ramon, or kind of our city to our south, is 5,111. And actually the largest number in Contra Costa actually goes to the county of Contra Costa. They have jurisdiction over all the unincorporated communities and portions of the county, and they were given a RENA number of 5,805. So we have been, as Diane said, we've been working on this for the last 1.5 years. Timeline going forward is that we are in the 30-day local public review period for the housing element that has been made available on our website. We will be continuing forward through a process that will get us to a public hearing on the housing element and any land use changes that we need to make in association with it. Targeting getting to public hearings in front of the Plan Commission in December, and then on the Town Council in January of 2023. So this morning, I'm going to turn it over to Riley Anderson Barrett, and she's going to talk about our latest tool that we've rolled out beginning on July 1st that is going to help the community provide additional kind of direction for the town on the density and the location of sites that we may consider. Riley?
Thank you. So as part of the town's ongoing community outreach, an engagement tool called the Housing Site Suggestion Map was launched in March. And the purpose was to ask community members which sites they believe have opportunities to accommodate more housing. Over the course of a month, 281 pins were dropped on 99 unique parcels. And each site was evaluated against the state's criteria, which includes parcel size, existing land use, the likelihood of the site being redeveloped in the next 8 years, and access to transportation. And viable sites from this analysis, along with staff-identified sites, were incorporated into the housing plan simulation tool that launched on July 1st. The tool was designed to seek input about which sites are most appropriate for future housing developments and will be available until August 1st. Successfully submitted housing plans will help inform the Planning Commission and ultimately Town Council in the decision-making process. Next slide, please. And the housing plan simulation tool can be accessed through the Housing Element project page on the Danville Town Talks website. This is an interactive tool for community members to build and share their idea of a balanced housing plan that meets the town's target RENA numbers. Next slide, please. In this simulation, the total units or the target goal is made up of the 2,241 housing units The town was assigned through the RENA process plus a buffer. And the buffer of additional housing units is essential to ensure the town can continuously meet its housing goals in each income category through the 8-year cycle in the event that an identified site is either not developed for housing or the housing developed is not within the needed income categories. And the buffer can be adjusted to what the user deems as most appropriate. Once the buffer has been identified, the balancing begins. There are 26 different sites identified within 5 key areas for housing units to be assigned. Next slide, please. A successful housing plan can shape in various ways. As you increase and decrease density, you will see the progress towards a successful plan shift. There are 26 sites to consider. You may find that you don't want housing on a particular site, and that's okay. Unless a site is already zoned for residential, the option to decrease the density to 0 exists, but keep in mind those units will have to be made up somewhere else. Once you have identified enough housing units and you are in the green, you can submit a housing plan. And we are happy to answer any questions.
I see that there's some questions, some Q&A in the chat. I don't know if you wanted to address those now or move on.
We can address them now. The first question is, will the slide deck be shared after the webinar? Yes, and everything as far as the process is concerned, our slide presentations will be shared on our website and also on the Danville Town Talks website /housing element. All right, next one. Does every site on this map tool need to accommodate some housing units?
So I think I can answer that question. So Riley Anderson Barrett did describe that. Every site does not need to have the housing units on it. Most of the sites do not have current residential development rights. And so if you saw a site that you did not think was appropriate for housing and wanted to assign 0 to it, that's fine. However, that would mean that we'd have to find more units on the other sites to get up to our minimum number. There are some sites on the list that are already zoned for residential development that we're looking at possibly upzoning to create more housing on a housing site. So those sites that already have residential development rights, we can't take them back down to 0. So they have rights to the number of units that they currently have.
Okay, we have another question. Can you explain why we need a buffer again?
Yes, I think I can handle that one. So the state has what's called a no net loss law. And so if we have a site in our housing element that's designated for multifamily housing, say at a density level that allows for them to be considered low and very low, and the site is developed in such a way that we don't actually end up getting those low and very low units, we have to immediately go and rezone a different site to recapture those units unless we have the buffer. And so the state actually requires us to have a buffer so that if that does happen, we already have additional sites that can count towards the minimum requirements. Otherwise, we would be continuously having to go out and potentially rezone additional sites as we go through the 8-year period.
Okay, I do not see any more questions.
Can I raise a couple?
Absolutely.
I submitted a question. I don't know if you have the questions that were submitted to the Town Talks, but I submitted a question relevant to where the chamber office is. And we're all aware that Town and Country, the back end of Town and Country has been sold. And that there's a possibility that they may be looking to potentially turn some things into housing. It would seem to me to be a perfect area to do something because it's close to downtown, right off the freeway, and avoids us having to build on our hillsides, which we all love. And my question had to do with, and I don't know if you know the answer to this, but my question had to do with if it were rezoned, how many units would you be able to fit? And does that just depend on how they put the proposal together? Like if they put together single family homes versus smaller units, medium units, how would you kind of, I don't know if you can even answer the question, but I thought I'd raise it since it's kind of a new thing for everybody.
Sure, that's a very good question, and I can attempt to answer that. So, the site is one of the sites on our list of potential sites. We do know that it changed hands from Monterre Associates to a new group. We have had some contact with that group, and we know that they are interested in potentially redeveloping the site. I think the site's around 4 acres, and we're looking at between 30 and 40 units per acre for all of our arena sites. So, if that was redeveloped, we would probably be counting on something like around 150 units on the property. It does, if we look at all our sites, it is a very good candidate for redesignation for multifamily.
That's
right.
great. And then if I could sort of, and did someone have something else? I just want to make sure I didn't interrupt.
We had 2 more come in, Judy, but go ahead.
Oh, okay. Why don't we take those 2 and then come back to me?
Okay. Next question, if a site is suggested for housing, but the property owner does not want to develop it, what happens?
So that's another really good question. And, we really need to clarify that our housing assignment means that we need to provide enough land that is general, has a general plan land use designation and zoning that would accommodate multifamily housing by right. The town of Danville does not build housing. We can't force property owners to build housing. There just has to be enough sites designated. So if the site is a site that would be accepted by the state of California as far as being able to reasonably expect that the economics of the site or what have you would be such that it would make sense to potentially redevelop. That's basically all we have to do. If the site doesn't redevelop in 8 years or 30 years, we don't have any control over that.
Okay, next question. What happens with the suggested housing plans that are submitted?
So that's basically going to inform the town on where the community thinks, if we have this list of sites, and it kind of informs the town where the density should go. So, the sites that we have, some of them, we have more sites than we're going to ultimately need here. So it's basically just to inform the town staff and ultimately our decision makers, the planning commission and the town council, where the community in general feels like the most appropriate locations are for the density.
Okay, I think that was it. Judy?
Well, you actually played beautifully into what my next question was going to be. But before I ask my next question, I did want to say we have with us today a couple people that are very, very instrumental in the chamber. Tim Argenti, our finance chair, is with us today. Welcome, Tim. And Brittany Doyle Riley, who is our government affairs and economic development chair, is with us today. Thank you, Brittany, for being with us. And also I saw in the questions, Marilyn Lucy is here from Rebecca Bauer-Cahan staff, our assembly member. So thank you, Marilyn. Appreciate you being with us today on this. Now that I've done my little infomercial on who's on the call. So one of the things that you talked about was, and that was an excellent question about if you identify land that could be redeveloped, but the property owner doesn't want to redevelop it. It's my understanding, I want to make sure that I hear this correctly, because I think it's an important thing for the public to know. My understanding is you need to plan for those units and have a plan for those units, but that doesn't mean that those units have to be completely built out by 2031. Is that correct?
That's absolutely correct. We expect that the housing units that we provide zoning and general plan for will develop over time. It's certainly, again, we just have to provide the sites that are zoned appropriately, and when they actually develop isn't as important to the state as having the land available for development.
All right, Judy, I had another question come in. You want me to take that? Okay.
Go for it.
All right, we're experiencing a drought. Does the state allow us to scale back the housing assignment based on the environmental resource constraints? Will there be some sort of environmental analysis by East Bay Mud about whether there is enough water?
Good question.
Another very good question, and something, a question that has come up, and a question, concern that the town has raised when we were looking at our RENA numbers, and we were working with ABAG on the assignment. That's certainly a major concern that we have. We are currently preparing a environmental impact report that's going to look at the potential impacts on all of, for all the sites, not just water supply, but water, sewer, noise, cultural resources, air pollution, traffic related impacts. So those are all being studied. When we did raise the issue in an appeal letter to ABAG regarding our RENA assignment, we brought up that issue, and many other cities did, and that argument was rejected. So going forward, we're assuming that East Bay Mud is going to serve the sites for the housing element purposes at least, and then there may be further review on a site-by-site basis when actual development applications come in.
All right, and then we had one that kind of segues into what you just responded to, Dave, and as a follow-up about the water, what is the state doing to help with all the traffic congestion that comes along with this new development?
Well, I don't know that the state is doing anything. The state's basically telling all the local jurisdictions to plan for the housing and do their own environmental review. And so that is what we are doing. Again, we have a EIR that's under process. We expect it to be completed by the end of August. And then there will be a 45-day public review period for the findings of the EIR. So that'll go out to the public for review and comments. And then we'll have to prepare what's called the final EIR, which is a response to all the comments that we get. And those comments in the final EIR will accompany the housing element through the public hearing process in front of the Planning Commission and Town Council.
All right, thanks, Dave, for that. I do not see any other questions. Judy, do you have any other questions?
Well, actually, the water question is an interesting one to me, and here's my question. So, we've all heard about the development that's out in the Tusahara Valley. I believe it's called Tusahara Parks, that the county approved, but that Danville opposed, and East Bay Mud, I believe, may have drawn a lawsuit against that because they can't provide the water. And so my question is there a possibility of the same thing happening? And do a lot of this housing, if they can't provide the water, does it end up in litigation? And I'm just curious the process and the East Bay Muds, and I know John Coleman's been a great representative for us, but just curious how does that process work? David, you might have some experience with that already.
Sure. So the Tusahara Parks project, really the big difference with that project is that it was outside of the citizen approved urban service boundary. So East Bay Mud has never planned to provide public water services out to that area. So it was a new demand that was never anticipated. All of our housing sites are in the town of Danville or are in East Bay Mud urban service boundary. And so in general, anything in cities that are in their service area are served by East Bay Mud. So it would take kind of an extraordinary move by East Bay Mud at some point to determine that they don't have enough water to serve projects that are within the urban service boundary. So I guess we anticipate that they will, but we'll kind of cross that bridge when we get there. We know that the state is plowing forward with ARENA, and this is going forward all over the state, and they haven't changed any of their projections or requirements based on the drought or provision of water.
All right, so that just sparked another question. Great questions coming in this morning. Speaking of litigation, have other cities attempted to resist adopting a housing element or sued the state?
Well, there are a lot of examples that we can look at down in Southern California, because the regional governments down in that area are on another cycle, so they're a little bit ahead of us. We know that of all the cities down there, a fairly small percentage of cities have met the deadline to get an approved housing element, so they're still working with the state. There are several cities that are being sued by the state because they don't feel like they've made a good faith effort to try to create a housing element that is compliant. There are significant penalties for not having a compliant housing element that we've talked about before. And those include a fine of up to $600,000 a month by the state. It includes a moratorium on our building department that basically shut down our building department, not allow any building permits, which would include remodels or additions throughout town. Maybe the biggest threat, which is something that is potentially happening down in Southern California. It's still under litigation, I believe, but the state could actually take over our planning function. If we don't, as a community, decide where we're going to put our housing, the state could step in and decide for us.
Okay, and we just had another question come in. Is it safe to assume that East Bay Mud will require all of the rest of us to use less water?
Yeah, that I cannot comment on. Do not know.
Okay, and then I had one other question come in about building where jobs and mass transit are and housing imbalance. We don't have any mass transit or a BART station. How do we plan to support the infrastructure for these 2,241 units? It's going to increase the greenhouse gas emissions. Was that factored in when this decision was made?
Again, that's a very valid concern, and it's a concern that the town raised early on with ABAG when we were looking at how they were going to distribute the RHNA numbers amongst the cities. We, as this, whoever this question indicates, felt that it was a better plan and a better methodology to prioritize communities that are the job centers, that are creating the jobs, that are creating the demand for housing, such as South Bay, West Bay, East Bay. But those arguments, while those communities did receive, a large number of units, just like we did, the ABAG really prioritized putting homes in what they call high resource areas. So they want to mix in higher density units in communities that have high resources, such as high performing schools and parks and community services. So that was something that we pushed back on, but in the end, it was really an attempt to place housing in high opportunity or high resource communities.
And we have a follow-up as to why they would want to put houses in high resource areas instead of, high density job areas.
Well, I think it's basically an attempt to kind of just keep a less segregated, called segregated communities as far as the affordability levels, that the affordable housing at different levels. They wanted to prioritize where communities don't have as much affordable housing. They wanted to prioritize some of the suburban high resource communities to kind of catch up to other areas with their percentage of affordable housing.
Okay, I think I don't see any more questions. Judy, do you have any more questions?
No, I think this has been a very, very educational forum. And I do want to see if anyone has any closing comments. If not, I do have just a quick closing comment, but does anyone else have any closing comments you might like to make?
Let's go to the next slide, and we'll just kick it off with our closing comments. You know, all of our engagement activities are available for your review on the Danville Town Talks website. We are trying to get the message out to all of our community members. We're going to keep trying. We want you along on this journey. If you're new to this engagement process, please visit the Danville Town Talks website, sign up for our e-news updates. The website contains all the previous workshops if you want to get up to speed or just refresh yourselves, all the presentations, the schedule as it is rolled out through this whole process, information about housing legislation that has impacted the housing element update process. And it also provides an opportunity for you to post your comments, your suggestions, your housing stories, and view what other community members are saying. So we also would welcome you to invite us to your community meetings. We have another Housing 301 session on July 20th at 6 p.m. So please spread the word. You're very important to us. And again, Judy, we'd like to thank you, and I'll turn it back to you.
Well, thank you so much. I think this has been one of our most educational programs that we've had in just a 32-minute period as I'm looking at my clock right now. And I'm really, really pleased that we did this. I guess my closing comments would be this. You know, from my previous position, which people know, many people know, I worked for Senator Glazer for many years, and there was no community in his district, not one, that was as much of a leader on trying to push back a little bit on the housing at the state as Danville was. Pleasanton was as well. And the reason is because we feel like our allocation is way beyond what we are able to do. I think it's been very challenging for the staff, and I really want to commend you, particularly the people on this call, for the work that you've done to try to comply and to try to, you know, make sense of it all. You know, this community is a fantastic community to live in. People love our quality of life, and I think we're all, you know, a little anxious about the thought of all this new housing coming in, and how do we prepare our infrastructure for it. So I just want to thank all of you for your hard work as public servants. This forum will be available as well as on the Town Talk site for housing. It's going to be available on the YouTube channel for the Danville Area Chamber. We appreciate everyone coming today. And if you enjoyed this forum, consider joining us for our Economic Development Committee tomorrow, where we will be talking about the Downtown Master Plan. That is available on the Chamber website for you to register at danvilleareachamber.com. And it begins tomorrow, the 14th of July at 2:30 p.m. So thank everyone for being here. Appreciate your engagement and your involvement and the wonderful questions. So thank you, Diane, David, Kat, and Riley for being with us today.
All right. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Have a great day. Bye-bye.
You too.